But whilst that's getting sorted, we'll get started. Honourable Leanne Enoch, Minister for Communities and Housing, Digital Economy and the Arts. Welcome. We're really honoured to have your presence today. Ms. Claire O'Connor, we have Claire online? Maybe.
Not yet.
Not yet. All right. We'll welcome Ms. O'Connor when she comes. And our very appreciated presenters and colleagues and participants, welcome. We're very appreciative that you've turned out in the westerly winds for today's presentation. And have we got people online yet? Yes, we have people online. So to people on Zoom, thank you for joining us. We're sorry that we had a bit of a delay connecting you in. I'm going to hand over to Tina Lathouris to invite us to acknowledge the traditional owners. You can sit here. Thank you.
Hello everyone. So I acknowledge the Turrbal and Yuggera peoples whose country we're physically on today here in Brisbane, and I also acknowledge the Aboriginal custodians from where I live and work, the Kabi people and the Yinnawarra peoples. So pay my respects to their elders past and present, acknowledging their continuing culture and contribution to both this city and to the region. So this year, CD Queensland's been reading this book together, Tyson Yunkaporta's Sand Talk, How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World. And for sustainability, he highlights Indigenous knowledge to which long-term thinking is fundamental. And particularly, he highlights this four-part sort of framework: connectedness, diversity, interaction, and adaptation. And so two of those themes are particularly resonate with me as when I think about CD Queensland, Community Development Queensland. So Yunkaporta emphasises networks as spaces for the continuous transferring of knowledge, energy and resources, and our ability to pass these things on together rather than store them individually. So, yeah, it's been a great reading group, I hear. I haven't actually been able to be a part of it. So, yeah, so we're just going to talk about CD Queensland. Yeah, fantastic. So, and that's significant, I guess, for us as a network, that our network has been meeting since 1974, when the first Community Development Conference was held here in Brisbane. And so, Tony, little did you know that when you and others had the vision to have the conferences, that they would evolve into what CD Queensland is today. So CD Queensland has become the most enduring community development network in Australia. We stay connected to Borderlands Cooperative in Melbourne and the Social Developers Network in New South Wales. So they're also very long-term, decades-long community development networks. And again, it's that, you know, knowledge exchange across networks of networks that Yunkaporta highlights as being so vital. CD Queensland hosts state community development conferences every second year, and that conference moves around the regions. The local conference committee does that work to bring about 300 to 400 of us together. And also in the early days, social policy forums were held on the off year. And now that social policy work is happening with our connections with the Queensland Families and Communities Association and with the Coalition of Community Boards Network. So I feel we're sort of still doing that work. We have 900 people on our email list, and all of these people, as you know, because you're here, are interested in learning about community development and supporting each other's efforts in community development. So structurally, we have what's called a coordinating group of about 15 of us at the moment, and we open that up every year when we have our planning day early in the year to anybody in the network can join that group if you want to work and be part of that coordinating group or any of the working parties for our planned activities for the year. So all in all, Not a bad track record really, because we are a volunteer network and we're working relationally and purposefully. So this year was supposed to be our biennial conference, but due to COVID, we are doing things a little bit differently. And Tim is going to tell us what we're going to be doing. It's very exciting. Get excited.
Get excited. Thanks, Tina. Hey, everyone. Lovely to see so many people here and on Zoom as well. For those who don't know me, my name's Tim Capuano. I'm here to announce something really big, really exciting, and I will read from my phone a little bit because it's a bit of a spiel and it got finalised today, so just bear with me. Tina said we're usually running a conference every 2 years. This year we're doing things a little bit differently. Gives me great pleasure to announce the Festival of Community Development 2021, Gather Your Circle. So wherever you are in Queensland, Zoomers included, wherever you are in Australia, in a city, deep in suburbia, on a rural property or in a regional town, we invite you to gather your circle and join with us for 6 weeks of keynote speakers, panel discussions, and a bunch of social activities for a mix of personal and professional development, as well as some great networking opportunities. A hybrid in-person and online event. The festival is an opportunity to connect and network with community-minded people in your locality across Queensland and Australia. We'll be exploring how community workers, CD practitioners, community thinkers, and community members can better respond to the new COVID recovery context, while deepening and developing relationships across the CD space through conversations and lots of fun, like silly fun. Silly fun. Anyway, now when we say gather your circle, we mean gather your circle. But what do we mean? Basically means if you work in a neighbourhood centre as part of a community support team, gather your circle of workmates and community members to be part of a small group for the festival. If you work in council or government, providing community support or community development work, gather your circle of team members and colleagues there. If you're volunteering or attending a community group or not-for-profit, or just an active member of the community, you can gather your circle of volunteers and community members. If you're studying or teaching, gather your circle of students. This is a great way to really connect with and get to know colleagues, friends, team members, and your wider community on a deeper level than sometimes we do. We're always hustling, bustling, got things to do. Let's set some time aside, get to know who we're working with, and really connect there. For time, I'll keep it short, but this part is important. We are in need of local champions. Like all great things in CD, this festival is by design participatory. We're in need of local champions across the state and beyond to rise up and take on the role as circle host, responsible for starting and maintaining your circle. You can contact me, I think that's my email there, you can do that, or at communityqld@gmail.com. Yeah, we've got dates roughly settling in for the second half of September and all of October. But there'll be a lot more information coming your way in the coming weeks. So thank you for that beautiful word spiel of mine, but great to see you all.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tina. The program this afternoon, I'll just tell you before, I'm Anne Ingemels, for those of you who don't know me, I kind of always forget to say that. If you need the restrooms out of either of these doors to the very end of the corridor, you need to go through the glass doors and to the right and the left. You'll find what you're looking for. The program this afternoon is divided into 3 parts. The speakers will have 30 minutes each approximately, and then 30 minutes for open discussion. Between each speaker, we'll give you a few minutes to jot down your thoughts, to talk to the person next to you. If you're on Zoom, please use the chat at that point so that you can share your thoughts and comments and questions that way. And at the end, you can bring some of that forward into the open discussion. So thank you. We are especially pleased to have the Minister here today because, of course, it says to us all there's new interest in community development, which has been kind of a little underemphasised over the last few years. And a lot of people don't quite get what the difference is. Isn't it just a form of service delivery? And I just wanted to say in opening today that as some of you know, I do a bit of very tangential but important to me work with people in some remote Indigenous communities. And really the services they have not worked well for them. This is in Western Australia, not in Queensland, so it may be different in Queensland. Probably not. But what people say to us very clearly is do not come in and deliver services, form partnerships with us for the changes that we know will help. That's the key community development message. And I think that's an important message for Indigenous people, but for all people who are somehow excluded from mainstream processes. And I hope today we're going to unpack a bit of this. So it's rarely we have our own elders come and speak to us. And I know Tony pulls a face, but I think it's important to think of it that way. 50 years in community development is no mean feat, and you know, I feel very privileged that we have Tony and Carmel here to speak with us. So I'm going to introduce Carmel. I hope you've all read the wonderful bio on the flyer. Carmel has worked tirelessly and passionately without seeming to tire across health, the arts, community services, local government and other areas, always carrying the torch for local people having a role in the decisions and practices that impact on them. And you know, particularly to be at the table for decision making, be it represented or otherwise. She never doubts for a moment that better decisions and better outcomes occur when community members are involved. So I've departed here from the official bio, so please go to it. Oh no, Carmel doesn't want a bio. So it's my pleasure, and I ask you to join with me in welcoming Carmel here today. It's your turn to start.
Yes, well, as you can see, you know, Tony's got about a quarter of a page. I've got about 17, and when you go to sleep, just feel free, really. The Honourable Member, and her wonderful policy advisor, Dr. Anne Ingramals, members of the Community Development Committee, my friend and colleague for over 50 years, Anthony Kelly, ladies and gentlemen. I invite you to journey with me on the evolution of 56 years of practice and to understand why I am committed to a participatory community development way of working, which facilitates both individual, group and social change. A practice that can engage those amazing people who might never have thought they could change the circumstances of their lives in the communities that they live. We know this practice begins where people are at, moving at their pace. It supports people to connect, form relationships with one another, individually and in groups, as they achieve something of benefit for themselves and their communities. I have experienced that change process and seen how a person's skills are enhanced and new skills are learned. I watched people's confidence grow as they learn to make decisions, reach agreements, organise meetings, take notes, discover who makes the decisions that impacts on their lives, and much more. I have watched people become resources in their community, Instead of seeing themselves as clients in a service delivery program, they see themselves as community members. Sadly, today, we are locked into an individualistic culture which holds the belief that social problems can be our fault, the result of individual weaknesses, and can be solved through personal change only. The contemporary world also privileges corporate interests over community interest. These notions take hold of our mindset, and we have to work hard to think differently. The method of practice is a way of thinking and acting across multiple levels and layers, from individual, family, community, and through the various levels of social and economic institutions. It mobilises change with all these points of contact and in the interconnectedness between them. If you haven't seen this happen or felt it, you have to try to imagine it and then, with support, try to do it. I have chosen some stories to highlight some special moments when I felt it and when I saw the amazing outcomes this way of working can bring or could bring. I am calling these moments plateaus, macro shifts in my learning. There's a few of them, so hold in. Even though my first plateau I'm sharing with you is not community development, I share it as, like many people today, I was locked into a service delivery way of working, and it took years and years before this different way of working became my practice. You are happy, I'm assure you, to know that this practice is now well articulated, tried, and a tested method of practice. So, my first plateau. Private is public, working from inside my organisation and outside. In the second year of my degree course, I was awarded, fortunately, a cadetship with the then Department of Social Security, which is now known as Centrelink. I worked in a very, very small, all-female section. We were doing what was then known as casework, working with individuals, focusing on their personal, private pain, an individualised, non-social change form of service delivery. Through that work, I encountered many women who were fleeing from a violent situation, but they struggled to find any financial support. The Commonwealth policy of the day was that if a widow she could immediately receive a pension because her husband was dead. If someone had been deserted, well, you better wait 6 months because that person may come back, but after that, you may be able to get some money. But if a woman had decided to leave her marriage, it was almost impossible for her to get any financial support. In this male-dominated department, there was a recognition of it. Yes, they'd say, it is unfair, but that is the policy. I began collecting women's stories and, of course, protecting their privacy, I shared them with these very senior social workers. Probably they were only about 30, but I thought they were very old. And of course, the social workers in the very, very, very small Queensland branch of the Australian Association of Social Workers. Once again, I was told, we've tried to change that policy, but to no avail. Well, I was young, I was inexperienced, I had a fire raging in my belly, and I really thought I would be able to make a difference in my life. In fact, I thought I'd probably change the world within 12 months. The experienced social workers, I kept raising it. I got this comment, oh, she's like a dog with a bone. Can we keep her quiet? The experienced social workers inside the department and outside collaborated. And again, with their colleagues throughout Australia, they kept raising the matter. And finally, there was a policy change. What did I learn? At that time of my life, I was embedded in and captured in individualised casework. It didn't cross my mind for one single moment that there was any other way of doing it, or that the women themselves could possibly have a say. I did not facilitate their coming together. I saw them as individuals experiencing discrimination because of a Commonwealth policy. I had unintentionally excluded them. At no time did they have a collective voice. The advocacy of the social workers for a policy change was embedded in the service delivery practice. We will advocate on behalf of. I learned three important things. The first is that personal pain, the private, has public implications and that needs to be changed. That we should never be silent when we see an injustice. And we can, and indeed must, work both inside our organisations and outside. The systems can be changed. Imagine, however, if I'd listened deeply to those women and their stories, if I'd supported them to come together so that they heard each other's stories, if I supported them as they made decisions and worked out how they wanted their stories to be heard, so that finally they knew they had been heard and they had contributed in their own way to a major social change. Although the final policy outcome would not have been different, but in terms of the process outcomes, much more would have happened. The women would have had a new sense of self, new skills, new relationships, a better understanding of how democracy worked, renewed trust in and respect for their government and the institutions, and a very different start to their life. In developmental methodology, there are very different sets of outcomes. When we work with people to achieve something important to them, instead of doing for and acting on behalf of them. The next plateau, we're moving along, is when I was a wife and a mother of small children, and the important strength of community. In 1969, I and my husband moved to a small Western Queensland town. Here, as a parent and a member of the community, I was involved with other parents and we chatted about the need for a kindergarten. I became very aware of the capacities and resources that is held in every community. I also got a strong sense that community is a lived experience. It is built when people work together on issues in common. And the more we do this, the better we get at forming public relationships, initiating public processes, and of understanding how the world we live in works. We must never take the power away from our communities. Although our family had left that community before the establishment of the kindy, I learned such a lot. In that context, I did not see myself as a professional person separate from others, but as a citizen, being with other community members who had many skills. There were no artificial barriers between I, who'd been trained as a professional, and community members. We had common purpose, similar experiences, and we were working together for change. This was different to my social work training, where boundaries, professionalism had been given great emphasis, rather than the experience of being truly together and being with people as community members. A major experience, the Australian Assistance Plan, 1974 to 1976, long before your grandmothers were born, was my next learning, and I will never forget it. Fast Track, 1976. Anyone alive yet? And on our move to a regional city of Mackay. Here, I joined the newly formed Council of Social Welfare, and would you believe it, Les Halliwell, whom you know by name, and his students had been invited to that community to form something. And what was formed was the Mackay Council of Social Welfare. This was the organisation who got amazing shock, nearly collapsed when the then head of the Social Welfare Commission in Canberra, Murray Coleman AM, invited them. How could you believe it? Invited them to apply for money to become the very first region to be fully funded in Queensland. You go, Minister, I know you've got a rush. Off you go. Thank you for coming.
I want to stay for the whole thing. My apologies, everybody. I have to go to another event, but
Well, I think we
this is
better give you a
a
good
thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Can I get a copy of your speech?
Oh, it's rambling.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. It's being recorded.
Bye. Thank you. Right, so they're invited to be the first in Queensland that was fully funded, right? I had the privilege, simply because Tony Kelly, or what are we calling you, Tony? Anthony, what do people call him? Anthony Kelly actually withdrew his application. And would you believe it, because he did that, I got it. We worked and visited every nook and crook, every tree, every river, every little everywhere of 8 local government areas now known as the Whitsunday, Isaac and Mackay region, implementing the AAP. Firstly, the people established their Regional Social Development Council. Then they had to figure out how would these 4 resources for community development workers, where would they be placed? Then they had to learn the skills to allocate $2 per head of population, untied, to our community groups who had developed local responses to local needs. I'll never forget this experience. Absolutely, this is where I truly experienced the power of the people. Community members coming together, 300 odd people, forming a people's organisation, enshrining in their constitution their right to speak, their right to be involved, their right to participate in the design and implementation of local solutions to local issues, shaping their huge region and inputting into local, state and government policies, their right to define the social sector as anything pertaining to their well-being, health, education, the environments, the arts and so on. This is where I truly understood and enacted Les Halliwell's mantra. Go to the people, be with the people, listen to the people and work with the people. As part of the implementation of that plan, Les and I, Mr. Halliwell and I, it was in those days, were taken down south, and here we met the two people from any other plan. There was about, I suppose, 10 of us throughout Australia. We had to share how the plan was going, what was happening, but also we had to tease out what community development meant. The people we met there spoke with such confidence and authority, and I had none. Came from Queensland, 1,000 k's from Brisbane, for goodness sake. And so I struggled to understand their perspective. How they described community development was very different from my own experience. On the plane going home, I found the courage to say to Mr. Halliwell, Mr. Halliwell, no one seems really to be working the way we are. And a man of few words, I'll never forget them. He said, go home, Carmel, be with the people and keep doing what you're already doing. The Australian Assistance Plan was an ambitious and visionary program that changed the national policy debate in 1970. It was very important. It had very important implications for regional Australia because it looked at new ways to support and involve regional communities. It only lasted 3 years while the Whitlam government was in power. However, in those few years, I had the strong sense that it had the potential to change relationships in ways which could generate better social policy, better practice, and greater social cohesion. Perhaps in time, resources might have reached the most pressing needs of the most marginal people. However, it required people to operate differently at every level. Structures through which people across the community could meet and work things out even if they held diverse views. Practitioners who knew how to ensure that the people who didn't have a voice were supported to speak. Shifts in local and state and Commonwealth government. Sadly, the AAP generated much national backlash from those who felt they would lose power and entitlement, and it ended abruptly. The key learning for me is the power of people's voices and that the movement needs to occur from the smallest voice into the larger groups and successive levels of government. How privileged I was to be part of this AAP and to live in that moment of time. You're going to stop me, please. They're going to sleep.
Carmel, I know you have more to say and I'll give you a little breather. And I know also that we were very late getting started but we need to hear this through, I think. And I just wanted to summarise, we've heard 3 plateaus of your working life. The plateau of a policy change that didn't involve the people, that really awoke you over time as you reflected on it to what could have been in terms of a shift in status of those women. The story of working voluntarily as a community member and understanding community resources and strengths and the benefit to community when people do things together. That was my own entry into community work, and it's wonderful to hear that story. And the story of the AAP, which is still a bit of a beacon on the hill to many of us who believe in social democracy. So thank you for that. And I know you have a couple more plateaus to speak to.
Do you want me to speak to them?
I
Yes,
do.
of course.
I do.
Well, I have to speak quickly. All right. Now, in 1976 to about 1982, 83, to my surprise and to the surprise of many people in Mackay, I was elected to a male-dominated Mackay City Council. I was a woman with young family and I should be in the home. In that structures, I initially felt devalued and experienced considerable discrimination. I grappled with the question of how an elected representative could still hold a participatory developmental way of working, and how could I be a bridge between the community members and the council on issues of importance. As well as doing that, I was very aware that I actually had to put up my hand. So it was quite a dilemma. Local government, as you know, holds a perspective of the whole community. The ranges of issues are extensive, you know, physical infrastructure, the arts, blah, blah, blah. And as an elected representative, I had to discover how to work inside the system and outside across diverse ranges of issues. I've been asked to tell stories. That was a mistake when you speak to me. So the first awakening of these matters occurred in my first term, when I read a letter that had come to council from a woman who wanted a very narrow two-way street made into a one-way street. My developmental methodology had begun to emerge in the Australian Assistance Plan, so I contacted the woman, listened to her story. She told me how dangerous the two-way street was. No footpath, kids riding in this little narrow street, fighting the cars, elderly people, probably a lot younger than me at the time, managing the road to go to the shops, parents pushing prams. And after asking that person if she knew any others who were concerned, she went ahead and arranged for about 35 people to meet us under a tree in a park. Whilst the woman was talking and arranging her neighbourhood and encouraging them to come, I worked within the structure. I knew that the elected representatives were frightened of my talking. So I spoke to the appropriate committee chair, encouraged him to go to the meeting, prepared him to hear what the people might have to say. And to my surprise, off he went. He was so impressed with the people, he took that matter on himself, talked to the other representatives. And it was a wonderful moment seeing the public gallery full of the people from the neighbourhood centre. And I saw the surprise and heard the joy when the elected representatives voted against the engineer's recommendation and the people had got their one-way street and they had done it themselves because they had Buckley's chance of doing it the other way. Over the successive years, I kept refining this practice. And I do recognise, and I'm going to leave out those little bits and pieces, but that inside even a closed statutory organisation where you encounter resistance to community voice, you can play a small part in opening up that system through respecting diverse opinions, forming relationships with people who really didn't like me very much, and just trying to keep going and sharing stories. During my term of office, I was thrilled that we created the first community development position from the rate base. This was quite a revolutionary change for that local government, and it saddens me to see that they've now been converted to top-down project work, but we won't go there. I thank publicly my friend and colleague, Anthony Kelly, for coming up and tirelessly being dragged off to meet the mayor and slowly wearing him down. And I congratulate another dear friend, B. Rogan, for being an amazing pioneer community development worker in that closed local authority. So we're going to fast track now up till the Newman government, which you still probably don't even know about, in 2012. In this period, I observed the voices of many people up until then being heard in different settings. New skills were being developed, and the articulation and the writing of our short course in the community development method was done. I just select a couple. The call for recognition. The South Sea Islander people in Mackay were supported by a visionary and extraordinarily skillful developmental worker who's here sitting with you, Maggie Schombrock. As they found their voice and linked with others in the wider public arena at state, regional and national level, they wanted to be recognised as a unique minority group which had been severely disadvantaged by racial discrimination. Following the 1992 report Call for Recognition, the South Sea Islander people achieved their goal. They were absolutely thrilled, and in 1994, the Commonwealth Government recognised them, followed by the state government in 2000. This recognised the injustice and the discrimination they had suffered over a century and their desire to maintain their identity. As my friend Rowena Trivia used to say to me, Carmel, we want a hand up. We don't want a handout. The short course was brought together by a small group of people, many of whom are sitting in this room and I hope on Zoom. And it occurred in the late 1980s. But to Tony's real disappointment, with the advent of the competency-based training in the 90s, some of the practitioners went on and we developed that into a competency-based language. These people also influenced certificates and diplomas at TAFE College, making sure that this developmental way of work was there. In 2 years alone, over 300 people were trained in both the community and the state government, community members and workers and board members. Finding a voice. Well, my friend B. Rogan kept coming back to Mackay saying, we're working differently in this region. And I kept saying, no, that can't be happening. She drove us almost crazy. And some other friends who come, well, she doesn't do that sort of thing if you know me, but they're my words. And other people would pop in, like the Deirdre Coglins, if any of you ever remember her. And she'd be saying the same. And she kept urging us to start writing. Eventually, through Tony's efforts, he managed to sneak me in as an enrolled student in a research master's course. He handled all the politics. I'd rush down the corridor occasionally and wave to everybody, sit in on the first lecture, finish, go into the last one. And Tony kept coping and say, could you just leave her alone, please? She doesn't really want this thing. He supported me. He showed me where to, told me all the wonderful authors to read, actually expanded my mind and others, and kept everyone quiet so we could develop our own methodology and articulate our own social change framework. Central to that was the participatory developmental cycle. At long last, we had found our own voice. The conceptualisation of the framework, the short course, my voluntary work in Mackay, my work with James Cook and TAFE, and the supervision of students strengthened my understanding of this important way of working. But the Newman government, actually those decisions ripped the fabric of our community apart. The regional organisation lost its core funding and never regained it. The sense of government and community working together was undercut. Staff were made redundant. People who understand this work, they were lost to us. Gradually, a community-orientated, potentially transformative way of working was being harder and harder to hold, and people were being pushed out or pushed into positions that cut them off from their community. The presence of the competitive, managerial, rational forces became overwhelming, and some surviving organisations began to compete against each other for funding. The collaborative, supportive culture was severely undermined. The corporatisation of community organisations, where financial and legal responsibilities were emphasised, but seldom was the reason why we formed this organisation in the first place. Large not-for-profits, some with national and international interests, were funded to run services in local areas, undercutting the fabric of those communities. Some well-intentioned church organisations developed their corporate structures and obtained funding and provided services with no real linkages back to the community except their staff. The people kept the regional council alive, but without any funding, it became increasingly difficult. Neighbourhood centres were delivering services and seemed to be losing the community development way of working. There were very few community work placements to train people. However, almost finished, against all odds, the practice does continue and has the capacity to flourish. Let me summarise. I've heard an increasing number of people say the service is not changing the way we are working at the moment. It is not changing the circumstances of poverty in our communities. There must be other ways. For this to happen, our existing organisations have to structure in and enrich their capacity to deliver two ways of working. And this way of working has to be seen across every sector, NDIS, youth, aged, the arts, everywhere. It is not a separate way of working. It belongs everywhere. We need to identify, at this moment, we need to identify board members, community members, paid staff who want to work this way and who are eager to engage in training and reflection and mentoring. Present research by Griffith University in collaboration with QFCA has shown how people are hungry to talk about this way of working. How exciting to see the peak body thinking about what is the relevance of this way of working to neighbourhood centres and their communities, and for looking at ways they can structure it in even to their own peak body. So finally, I reach my end. What I know is that we can work together to ensure that people can have a say, especially our most marginalised and disadvantaged community members. We can enhance existing structures. We can actually work with others to change this culture. We can honour people's right to have a say, to own the processes and outcomes of social change based on social justice principles. The values, the skills, the social structures to support this way of working must be struggled for over and over and passed on and further enhanced from generation to generation if we are to create a society of cohesion, of increasing equality and of non-violence. All it needs is for us together to have the will and the commitment to be part of this change. Thank you for listening to my ramblings.
My goodness, Carmel, that was very
Sorry
rich.
about that.
That speaks deeply to much of my experience, and I'm sure to much of everyone else's experience, and provides such a vision that you need to be a dog with a bone, I think.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Never let that bone go.
No. So please, let's just thank Mrs. Carmel Daveson AM again. They've done it, but we can do it again. And then I'm going to ask you to just take 2 or 3 minutes to chat with the person next to you about some of the meaning of this for you, whilst we catch our breath and reorganise for Anthony to step in. Thank you, Carmel.
That was so clear, wasn't it?
Probably just as well.
Yes. Thank you. Now, I do not intend, I will not answer any questions. No, I will not. I will not. I'm a very stubborn person.
Yes, we have. We worked that out a long time ago.
Fortunately, I don't have one to put up.
No, that's not true.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, sorry,
Maggie
saying
Shane. Maggie. Thank you. Okay, everyone, let's recommence. Lovely to see you all chatting. God, how do you shut that mob up?
I can relax now. I'm going to have a
Woohoo! It is now my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Anthony Kelly. He too, for some 50 years, has been working in this area, enabling communities to have their say in public processes that impact them. He's worked with staff from all levels of government, from inductees to ministers. He's worked with organisations, community organisations in every state, including the remotest parts of Australia. His interest in development work has taken him all around the world. If you did not read Anthony's bio in the flyer, I encourage you to do so. For me, I'd like to say that it was Anthony who introduced me to such giants as Gandhi and Paulo Freire and Frantz Fanon, and who taught me to both value tradition and build new edges onto it. In the participatory fashion, Anthony requested that I pose him questions which were devised by Tina, Helen and Linda Chavella, Helen Betts here, who are the people who most engage with students studying community development, new graduates and students on placement. So from those experiences arise a number of issues of understanding, which they are very familiar with. So please join me in welcoming Anthony Kelly tonight.
Thank you, Anne. It's a hard act to follow after following Carmel. I could tell you some, you can't work in participatory work for more than 50 years like we both have and not have a fund of stories. Helen, my dear partner, has banned me from telling some of them. But that's not the journey, because I think that task was really set up by Carmel. The journey of our professional lives, very privileged professional lives across 50 years of working with people. It's an amazing experience. So to try and help me through that process, my dear colleagues have, put together some questions. They're senior questions, and so it's going to be, I'm going to try and respond to those questions as an old senior worker. So if we can kick off with the first question, Anne.
So Tony, why are we still fighting to get community development recognised as a valued practice? Why isn't it in the engine room of decision makers?
Okay, now this is an opinion of mine. And at the one time, the reason why we've been locked out is both simple and complicated. But my own strong opinion about it is that we have not, as a development process, been part of the policy process. And that's the thing, we have not had community policy. We've always been responding to government policy. Now, I want to give you a bit of history because my experience, my teachers grew up and worked in the 1950s. So my lived experience started in the 1960s, but my teachers worked in the 1950s. So across now 70 years, but across 50 years of mine, I saw three very, very significant efforts on our part to become part of the policy debate, for us to develop our own policy. And the first of these was the development of peak councils like QCOS, of which some years ago I was their first director. Now, it's interesting that the council, they were initially called the Council of Social Services. And in the 1960s, they changed their name to the Council of Social Service. And the change in name was deliberate to enable it to take on an advocacy campaigning role for services. So a very significant change indicated by that change of name. When I was the director in the 1970s, at the same time that Carmel was working with her regional council for social development, a group of us wanted to change the name of QCOS to the Queensland Council of Social Development, so that it included a people's voice in that process. And the larger welfare organisations were very uncomfortable about that. So it was not a successful development. The second phase of our attempts to develop community policy was that a small group of us went to Melbourne to ask the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, which has been by far the single most important policy agency in Australia, and to ask them to set up an office of the Brotherhood of St Lawrence here in Queensland. They agreed. But maybe some of you will know that the Brotherhood of St Lawrence is not constituted under the community services legislation. It's actually constituted under a Victorian Act of Parliament. And so they couldn't legally set up in Queensland, to our great disappointment. But they said, we will help you establish an organisation that maybe can do the job. And an organisation with their help was established called BREAD. BREAD, very powerful. Basics, research, education, action and development. At the same time, there was a little group working on that, and another group, of which Anne and myself were part of, thought that the analysis that we needed to develop policy was about violence. Violence at the international level with war and civil disturbance, of course, at the domestic level, because violence, without a doubt, is the most important cause of poverty. So a little group of us established what we call the Peace Research and Education Centre. Interestingly, the Queensland government took our little group to court, saying they should not establish such an organisation. And Justice Kimmins agreed with them. The state government then in court said, this little group of us should pay the legal costs of the state government. Thankfully, Justice Kimmins said this was not a frivolous case and dismissed that we had to pay the legal fees of the state government. Now, unbeknownst to us, 6 months later or something, they offered us the opportunity to register as an organisation. Now, the mistake that we made was that our resources at that stage were divided into two. The group doing the bread work and us doing the peace research work. And collectively, I think it was a very bad decision. We should have held together. And so both small, totally non-funded groups really then folded. The third phase, and Tina referred to this, was a huge effort on our part to establish a community forum in every alternate year to the conferences that a few of us, Sagata and others, set up in 1974. The conferences were going well. What we needed was a policy forum to develop our policy, not to respond constantly to government policy. That just was too big a task for us at the time. So the next phase is really ours to make now. What are we going to use? What way are we going to develop to make our policy? Because unless we do that, we're constantly responding to the proper policy developments of both the national and state governments. So I think the answer to the question, long answer, the longest you'll get from any one of these, why are we still fighting to get CD recognised? Because we haven't got a policy outfit. So we can't dialogue with them, we can't argue with them. So, long answer to that question, I know.
Profound. Are you ready for question 2?
Question 2.
So how can we foster community development thinking and practice, especially when the practice name has been appropriated by governments and large NGOs and is really in the guise of service delivery? For example, can you do good work even knowing that the institution is problematic, whether it be government or an NGO?
Right. See, these are the problems that we've got because we haven't got a coordinated policy response. Now, in order to respond to that question, I just want to give you a few examples of the content of the policies that we now need to develop. Over the last 50 years, as Carmel has indicated so clearly, our understanding of how to do this work and different models of doing this work, we have a profound understanding of that now. We can train people, we can explain how to do this work, we can write about it, we can talk about it, we can do. So the development has been about the nature of the work itself, not really about the policy parameters around it. For example, we still haven't got a good enough definition or a description of the work. So when the International Community Development put out a definition, we said, no, it's not right.
We did.
It doesn't include the people. So, I mean, that's a really important piece of policy work that we've got to do. Another one, we still haven't got a clear enough idea of the role and the relationship between those of us who have been privileged and been paid to do this work with and earn a living from it, with those who do it because they're in it. Now, the nature of that relationship needs us all to have an agreement about what policy guidelines bond that incredible connection between those of us who have earned a living and have been trained formally in this and the people that we work alongside. Another one, we don't contest jobs that are called community development, and they are very often community service delivery. Sometimes they're not even service delivery. They're community liaison, linking the institution with the community. Sometimes they're not even that. They're actually a public relations role that sets up the morning tea for goodness knows who. So we've got to be able to contest those job descriptions that are not helping us at the moment. They just befuddle the situation. People calling themselves development workers and they're not. Another one is we must start to distinguish in our work whether we're asking for a project, a worker, a program, or an organisation to be funded. They're quite different asks. And we need to be clear when we're asking about that. Another one, we need to be, is this too much? Another one in terms of the policy work that we've got to do is we've got to be able to explain what success is for us, not tick the box that we've seen 1,000 people, which is currently the oppression that we're under, which it is. It's a form of oppression. Another one, we have not moved far enough away from our roots in welfare. Welfare is the fourth most important cause of poverty. Violence is the first, welfare is the fourth. We need to be able to do this work with the mining sector, which Helen and I had the privilege of doing around the world. We need to do it with agriculture. We need to do it with the pharmaceutical companies. We need to be able to do it with the insurance companies. These are our domains, not just welfare. The arts particularly is another. So they're just a few, I think, of what I think, if we had capacity to develop policy, we can then have a meaningful exchange with the government. Am I going down to hands up if we're all going all right? Is it? Okay, all right. Next question.
So how do we foster emerging practitioners to work from a CD framework in spaces where the model of practice is not valued?
Yeah.
For example, they get passionate at uni, but then that is squashed in the workplace.
Yeah, it's so true. The last several years, what we've done is train some very, very, very good people, and they get into an organisation and they just get squashed. Not intentionally or with bad will, but the organisation itself is so service oriented. It's just nowhere near where their heads are at, and so on. Some of these people, thankfully, have moved interstate, and some we know have moved to other parts of the world to seek quiet refuge there. I think one of the things that I was a little bit part of was the QFCA's little experiment last year to actually not intervene at the worker level, but to intervene and try and explain to the directors of a few neighbourhood centres what they needed to do organisationally to make it safe for a development worker. So it was a little experiment, but that sort of experiment needs to be continued in a much broader way. So I think we've really got seriously to think about some of the graduates that Tina and Helen and co are turning out, so that we've got safe places for them to work and live with. So may the QFCA experimentations continue and grow is the way forward on that one. But we can't just keep putting young workers in particular into places where the work is not understood.
Question 4.
Yeah.
What do you think the role of government should be when you reflect on community
I wish
development?
the Minister was here for this one.
Yes, we all do.
I think we've got to think completely differently about our relationship with government. We've really got to understand that their current culture and processes are nowhere near meeting the requirements that we have as development workers. So if we've got that on that hand, and we've got our requirements on the other hand, how do we get these two worlds to meet? So the last couple of weeks when this question came to me, I thought, what is it? And this goes not only my local work here in Queensland, the national work across the country, but also, you know, the many, many places around the world that I've visited this and been part of this work. The recurring theme in successful practice has always been education and training. That has been the key to the greatest organisations who do this work in the world. You ask them, what keeps you going? They say education, constant education and training. Now, if we combine that with the realities of government that want particular outcomes. And I just put this up as a first idea. What if we said we want for Queensland 10 traineeships in development work, 10, to last a year with a wage, with a small travel budget attached. This we would see as developing our capacity and our leadership. We could say to them, the assessment criteria for application will be that they have a base to be a trainee from. 2, that they undertake that they will do a piece of participatory work during that traineeship. 3, that they specify a learning program for themselves, both reading, visiting, and consulting. 4th, that they specify a pathway after the completion of the traineeship as to what they're going to do with it. And finally, that they submit a report of that experience to a joint committee of the community and the government. That meets a lot of their requirements that we can specify. It's particular, we can evaluate it, it's got detailed programs to it. It may, I don't know, meet a lot of their internal logistical requirements. At the same time, do what we really want to do, which is the development of people. Now, if we could get together a joint application across organisations, the universities help us, QFCA help us, the co-op helps us, the development co-op helps us, Maury O'Connor's organisation, which is an outstanding example of this work, they also provide. So we jointly approach the government, not separately, jointly approach the government for a proposal that we agree upon. Now, that proposal of mine is just on the table. Are there others that could join us together more to be able to come forward with that? But the real insight that I think I'm trying to offer is it's got to meet our objectives and we've got to deal with their reality. So that's what I think the role of government should be, could be.
Question 5. Where are citizens' voices valued? And why aren't citizens' voices valued in other spaces?
Oh boy. I don't know. The world of influences for, I'm now hurtling towards my 80s, so.
You are not.
The world of influences is really quite beyond me. Our professional world in development work is absolutely guided by values, not by popularity or fashion. So I'd be the last person to talk about that. It's so far away. The world of development work is so far away from lobbyists, promoters and self-promoters in the world of TikTok. I think TikTok is part of it as far as I know. So when we say it's not done by me, it's done by the people, it's done by themselves, it's their work, it's their world and it belongs to them. It's so far away from how people understand citizen influence, But we wouldn't change our values for anything. I mean, that's really the soul of the work, the inspiration of the work. But the value clash is huge. Over to you. Last one.
Last one. How do you think COVID has impacted on our communities? And what are the implications for us? So we've had the kindness pandemic, but also the blaming and shaming around public health breaches. What are we to think?
Well, it's a very interesting question, that one. Australia's been incredibly disciplined in its response to COVID. But there are, in my view, two faces to that. There is the civic, social responsibility that so many of us have. But there's also that deep strain within Australian society of selfishness. And our so-called disciplined response, how much of it has been inspired by me not wanting to get sick, or our responsibility to each other, particularly to our most vulnerable. And I don't know the answer to that question, what it is. But what I do know from reflecting on the nature of development work is that we've got a mountain to climb, beginning now, really, but certainly as the COVID process ends, because it's so divided us one from the other. It's divided families, it's divided communities. My hope is that it's not as bad as violence, because violence is a human intervention. So there's a lot of blame and other issues that are associated with our development work when it comes to violence. So, but it's unspeakable, the divisions globally about what's happening, including our closest neighbours, Indonesia and Papua New Guinea, as well as the divisions, within our own families, the struggle to see my two daughters and our granddaughter and so on, those matters are our professional domain. That's if anybody, if any group can help that healing process, it's us, whose very job is to join people together.
Lovely note to end on. I mean, that reinforcement that it's our job to join people together in this divided world. Thank you so much, Anthony. That's a wonderful challenge to us. Would you like to take 5 minutes to check in with each other and feel your responses to everything that you've heard tonight, and then we'll move into a dialogue, an open discussion together. And Zoom, please do use the chat to share Your thoughts? Both through the Zoom and people here. If you can, when you want to share something, stand up and direct it to, you don't have to come down here, but if you kind of direct yourself to the microphones and speak up, it will be picked up on Zoom as well as all around the room. You've been having wonderful animated conversations, so over to you. Introduce yourself too when you speak. Thomas.
No, you haven't noticed that, but like Carmel has like quite quietly positioned here, so she doesn't have to be at the front there. But thankfully, there's wheels on her chair. That's where you belong.
Now you see, that's taking total control.
Yes, absolutely.
I heard a comment that this seems like a right time for something. Is that something people have been thinking or saying?
I said that.
Do you want to speak to it, Maggie?
Yeah, sure.
Come on up here, Maggie.
I'll just because I'm aware of people on Zoom and how terrible it is when you can't hear. No, I'll just sit here. I was just saying, I was at a meeting with the minister that Q Shelter had convened. It was a meeting of regional representatives from around Queensland, and the Minister Enoch had been invited. And it was the first time, I suppose, in my 40+ years of practice that I heard a minister say, "I have said to my staff, it is time to lay down your power and listen." And I thought, whoa, that's a really powerful statement. I wonder if there's a full understanding of what that really means. And of course, probably not, but nonetheless, an invitation to give it a go, I think. And I've been giving it a go with support from Queensland Shelter in terms of older women in housing. And we have women with lived experience involved in sitting at the table in what's called a sponsor group. These names, I don't know where they come from, but nonetheless, I'm happy to be part of what is called a sponsor group. And the sponsor group is government and women with lived experience, older women with lived experience. And I'm an old hippie and I've got some work to do before I leave. And that has to do really honestly with housing older women at this point in time. It's an outrageous situation that we have in our society. And that voice is being listened to. In fact, it's the top of the program and a voice that they really want to hear. But that voice is being developed over 18 months. It's not a voice straight off the street. It's a voice that takes time. It takes time to develop a voice that can be heard and influencing in a particular context like policy work and the division of money. But why I tell you that story is she's the minister for that department. When I heard Tony's proposition about 10 traineeship positions, I reckon, given the minister we have currently and what at least her heart, I think, wants to do, whether she's across what that means in reality might be another matter, I'm not sure. But I think we've got to take her at her word and see if we can put forward a proposition like that. It might need, we might want to talk through that a little more and fine tune some of it a bit more. It's a broad, high level proposal, Tony, isn't it, at this point? You probably have done further thinking about it too, but I think there's enough there to really put forward that proposition to her. And I reckon she'll be looking to have sort of some legacy pieces. So I reckon that would be really worth a go. So I don't know who's interested, but I reckon it's worth a go. And thank you for putting the proposition. I think it's good to have a clear action that can be kind of move things forward. So yeah. And I think the timing might be right. So well done. Yeah.
Thank you, Maggie. Some of you at the back who are having such animated conversations, you want to share some of your thinking?
on, Dan.
So, I mean, I
Dan,
think
if you stand, it's probably
we
helpful.
were, we were sort of, I guess, echoing what Maggie was saying and what Tony was saying. As I came through, I went sort of straight into working in a neighbourhood centre up in D-Bay, worked with Howard and Micah and a few others up there. And having something like, you know, moving into the traineeship and having that backup of just that space to learn, especially with a lot of the subjects being cut out of university and that sort of thing, and being able to learn the tradition from those who have held it for so long and not just sitting in a classroom.
Yeah.
I think that's something that sort of hit me out of what Tony was saying.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
Don't be shy.
Hi, I'm great. I'm Tammy Miles, and I similarly echo, I think the time is right. So I work in the disaster management field and in Queensland. And so for about the last 8 years, we have been employing community development officers on the ground to work with communities to assist the recovery process, but also to work with community around how can they, work as a community to improve their future resilience. My observation across that time is they've kind of been a really isolated workforce. There, as you very rightfully pointed out, there are very few community development officers employed now across the state. A couple of our other national jurisdictions have had a couple of bad disaster seasons. So they too have now employed community development officers. So this year we actually set up a community of practice nationally to support them. So I think, Tony, adding to your proposition of the trainees is also saying to government, we know you've got some already out there. How do we actually bring that together? Because that is how we will grow this profession.
Wonderful. Thanks, Tammy. Yeah.
Would you like a comment back?
Yes, feel free.
On that, we won't go too far wrong if we're not asking for money for an organisation. We're actually asking money for a person. And we can even say this worker, this person in this circumstance, and this will be their base, and this is what they can do, and they can be a leader in this group to inspire this sort of work. That was my imagination. Traineeships could be the wrong word. I think the co-op Peter uses another word.
Fellowship.
A fellowship. I'm not hung up on the word. It's the idea. We've got to ask them to invest in people, not in organisations.
Yeah. Someone was saying on the chat, traineeship's a great idea, but how would we get government to understand that? And then someone else was saying the traineeships are something government already understand. There may be some issues around it, such as it's a fairly low status, low paid situation, but it's the basis for a conversation, isn't it?
Well, that particular minister called recently for internships and mentorships.
Wonderful.
For in the digital world.
Yeah.
So she's onto that notion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Hi everyone.
Kelly.
I'm Kelly. I've been around community development in the community sector and local government sector, but I've recently moved to social enterprise. I moved to social enterprise because I saw an opportunity for the sectors to also join forces and collaborate. So on the subject again of traineeships, which you're saying is something that the government knows is a safe investment, but also a vehicle that we can use. And you guys have got a great model at Nunda too, but being able to provide traineeships where they can have those experiences and build that capability. Community development, social enterprise is a really nice environment for those skills and experiences and learnings to be exchanged. So I think if we look at it in terms of how we can diversify the different environments where we can build the capability, whether it's in community development focused neighbourhood centres, whether it's in social enterprises like Nunda Co-op, whether it's through youth change agent type mentoring in the schools as our partners. Schools are massive hubs for this work as well. Then we can think a little bit more creatively about how we might leverage off a vehicle such as traineeships, which we know the government will invest. The Minister visited a couple of social enterprises last week, was interested in some of those in the digital economy space. So there is definitely appetite going around.
Respond to that?
Yes, see, this is where I think we've made so much progress over the last 10 years in particular. You know, so we've got not only the groups that we've traditionally worked with, but we've got, you know, the social enterprise groups, the community economic groups, the resource development processes, the dialogue process, the hospitality processes, all of which are expressions of the methodology in its different forms, and to open that out so that we're seeing not just a subset, a pretty poor subset of welfare that of which we're very proud to belong in many ways, but open that out. I couldn't agree more with you. That's a ripe area where to invest in, you know, young leaders or leaders in that area to carry the tradition, take the tradition, learn it and carry it forward. I think it's something that we could join with the government on, you know, it seems to me. I don't want to oversell it though. I mean, that's not my job.
On other points that were raised, any thoughts, comments, questions? Yes. Jeff.
You first.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks, Tony. We had a good conversation down here, but especially on the last question you got asked around the COVID response. I mean, the one we hear it a lot, particularly its community development implications, but the one that just keeps on hanging under below the radar, ridiculously so, is just the phenomenal success across the nation of Indigenous communities protecting themselves.
Yes.
I mean, precisely the opposite of what you said about that selfish trait, but it's very much a community scale. And, the more that can be celebrated, the better. And I think there's an extension of that into the more we can celebrate great stories of communities themselves developing. I still think we do enough of that. A lot of community development work works with vulnerability and addressing problems, and I get that. But the more we can celebrate like genuine successes, places like Burke that have, you know, like a lot of towns had some initial wins, but are well past the honeymoon period, and, you know, some really, really sustained indicators of success. I think the more we can do that, particularly focusing on Indigenous communities, I think the future for community development is good.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. Tony began in quite a provocative way to challenge us to really think about, can we move away from constantly responding to government policy to having a policy collectively developed up through communities on issues that we're prepared to really dialogue on? How did people respond to that provocation?
I thought it was great, and I'd just like to hear more because that just seems so obvious and so important.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't have specific questions about it, but I'd like to hear more about what's possible.
Mm. Yeah, we need our imaginations feeding around it a bit, don't we? Yeah.
And I'm a bit of a fringe dweller in community development and other sectors, but I've been kind of a little bit tracking the Australia Remade network, and it seems like that might be an opportunity for some policy connection.
Perhaps you, Maggie, you could share the past.
Yes. Well, I mean, I was part of that whole policy work events, those events. I loved them. I thought they were so exciting, and they were just full of energy and you know, a lot of work that went on before that we ever gathered, and then during the gathering. Great work. And this lady wanted to.
Yes, please.
Hi, my name's Anari. My question, Carmel, your story about being at West and with the community with the kindergarten really resonated with me, because I've been thinking a little bit lately about how I step outside of my own professional framework just to allow myself to be the people that I'm with, and be the community and be the community member, and not always have on a meta framework that I'm thinking about the processes. I was wondering if both of you could provide some feedback or suggestions on how we can be, you know, the community ourselves while we're also being community development practitioners.
When I first imagined this event, I sort of more imagined it along the lines of telling some stories about what it was about. And I thought, no, I really need to trust my dear colleagues and get them to frame questions. But for example, just, you know, Carmel talked about, you know, some critically important moments in her, and we all have them. And I'd like, if it's okay, to share one of the most profound ones for me. I was working in Alice Springs, in the town camps in Alice Springs, and it was my first full-time work with Aboriginal people, and I'd get home at night and just cry. I couldn't believe it. You know, I'd heard about it from my family and everything like that, but to be in it was extraordinary. And there was a wonderful, wonderful Aboriginal man, and he came up to me when he could see that I was upset, and he put his big arm around me, and he said, "Tony, you're crying for yourself. You're not crying for us. We want you to work with us." What a bloody compliment that was. And I thought, no more tears for me. In this work, I've got plenty of tears of my own to, you know, to deal with, but not at work. I've got to bring, and this is what dear Henry was saying to me, I've got to bring my best brains, my best heart, my best practical ideas to work in this arena. That's my contribution. And as the years have gone by, I now know we've got to do that work with our own communities. The Aboriginal Islander people have made so much progress from those early days in the 70s when I was doing that work. They're professors now, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're leaders in their own right. But what we're not doing is working with our communities about the construction of our country. So I asked, in my last year of teaching at university, I hope these stories aren't too long, are they? Or,
No.
In my last year of teaching at university, I was asked to develop a course, and one of the things was to work with the Indigenous issues. And so I asked everybody to do a task, and that was to talk to their own family about Indigenous matters without generating violence or disharmony within their own families. That was the task. They had to use the dialogical method of community development to talk with their own families. Now, in the 3 or 4 years that I was running that course, almost no one could talk about these matters within their own families without causing disharmony. And one story in particular was a young woman who attempted to do this within her own family. Beautiful work. And of course, her brother went off the face and her father said this, and then her mother said, close this down, this is spoiling our, gathering together. And so she was in her room at night. Her grandmother lived with her. And her grandmother knocked on the door. This is the mother of her mother. And said, I want to tell you a story. And so this girl said, yes, absolutely. So the grandmother sat on a bed and said, I've not told this story to anyone. You're the very first person that I've. When I was giving birth to your mother in the hospital, a nurse came in and gave me an Aboriginal child, whether I would suckle an Aboriginal child. Just the once. And she said, there's not a day gone that I've not thought about what happened to that child. So it must have been a custom in that time or whatever. But that grandmother had not had the opportunity to talk about that. And one of the most wonderful things that I've ever seen internationally was the work that our development workers did in Ireland to bring peace. Just by us being skilled enough to tell stories that matter and to open it out. So for Carmel and myself, we're crazy because we see opportunity. It's everywhere. This work is everywhere. This work can be everywhere.
I think that's a beautiful note to bring us to a conclusion, really. This work is everywhere. It's in all of us.
Let Carmel have the last.
No, absolutely. I went first, you go last. I think it's a lovely note to finish. I really agree with you.
Look, from our, if I can speak on behalf, because we've had a partnership now in this work for a long, long time, to thank you all for coming from the bottom of our hearts. I hope we haven't been too old and fuddy-duddy. And also to thank the people on Zoom for champion. But yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
We can't do anything in community development or in community development Queensland without
Baked goods.
baked goods, yes,
Goods.
and nurturing ourselves. And this is a thank you. And I said to Tina I wasn't going to do it because I'd cry. But these three people here are significant in our history, in our work, in our practice. Their wisdom, their knowledge, their sharing, the plateaus that Carmel talked with us today are so significant, and we all can relate to that. The challenge that Tony has given us around thinking about the policy stuff, you know, that's enormous. Anne, my colleague, friend, thank you. You did such a great job today managing ministers and, you know, everyone else. But we'd like to hear your thoughts as well. So I'm going to do a bit of a thing around the room. And not everyone has to speak, but if you want to call out a word, a thank you, or something that expresses how you're feeling now and towards our wonderful time that we've had together and this conversation that is so important in our work and such important people. So I'm just going to do this. I'm going to stand in the middle because there's a cord there. So I'm just going to do this. And as I move that around, yell out. Okay. And I'm going to do it very, very, very slowly. Don't be shy.
Valuing tradition.
Very
Inspiring. Thank you for your legacy.
Yeah, appreciative of provoking thought.
Generosity.
Enriched and challenged.
Openness.
Awesome.
Inspired. And reminded.
Energized.
Gratitude.
Starting journeys.
Classroom filled.
Grateful.
Thoughtful.
And thought provoking.
Spark.
Grateful for wonderful eldership.
You are one social media account away from being an influencer.
Thank you. And over to you, Anne.
Well, just thank you, Helen, for hosting us here because she's our Griffith contact, and also Christian, who came along tonight because Helen and I felt a little insecure about the technology, and Chris, who always helps us untangle our technology problems. So Chris and Christian, thank you. And also everyone, like Helen said, bringing together tonight. It was a huge effort from everyone, Tina, Thomas, Chris, all of us, and Helen, and huge effort from Carmel and Tony. So, but it's great to have taken a step together. And I would just like to say there were a couple of comments on the chat that sounded like people want to talk more about them. One that struck me was, what is it communities can do? What is it we can help communities do? What is it only government can do? And how do we have the conversations to get really clear on this? I think that's a seminar topic down the track and a deeper discussion topic. And I think tonight I've heard wisdom that has come to us from your experience of some kind of fellowship, internship, traineeship that links across sectors and begins to really anchor a developmental tradition. And if you'd like more discussion about that, or you'd like to be involved in discussions if we take that to the minister, I really would appreciate it if you can just put your name and email on a piece of paper with that topic and leave it so we don't lose you. because I think you have a wonderful contribution to make. So once again, thank you to our fabulous speakers. If anyone wants to join us at the Ship Inn for a beer or a lemonade or